Hello, everyone. Welcome to Cave and Cross Apologetics. I am Patrick.
And I'm Tony.
And we're taking the slow boat to get past Hume and see if we can knock him down once and for all. And of course, we're using Craig Keener's book, Miracles, kind of the quintessential 2-volume book that you want to own if you're at all interested in miracles. And so far, at least from what we've been reading, his argumentation is very straightforward. It's very good. It's very consumable too. I was thinking there was maybe a few sections in this part that I really had to sit down and make sure I knew all the parts, but I think it's a very clear presentation, at least here. And so I'm actually curious to check out a lot more of his factors. So of course, what Keener does in his book is kind of take, of course, the positive approach from both the Old Testament and New Testament argumentations for miracles. Here, in kind of the middle section of his book, he's responding to critiques, and of course, Hume being kind of the most known proponent or opponent of being against miracles, and kind of people of our day now kind of taking his stuff and running with it. And so far we've kind of looked at, well, maybe during even Hume's time, he was maybe more of a well-known writer than he was a well-known argumentationist, and using people who still believed in God, but only the blind watchmaker version of it to make his argumentation, which is problematic, but not in the political sense that we know today, but more so for being consistent. And then
and Keener is going to say, as we'll see today, that perhaps Hume's reputation and how well he wrote, as you mentioned, helped to propel his take on miracles, because he doesn't find that his logic is really that tight, and we'll see that over and over again today.
Yeah. This more so is kind of a look at more the logic side of his argumentation. Where in the past episodes we've kind of looked at human history and kind of built up kind of the meta-narrative of his application. But what Keener does for the rest of the book also is provide something that's probably a little bit more unexpected, and he'll talk about it in this section in the chapter, although I don't think we cover it really as much, but he brings up various miracles that are still being supported today and post New Testament. So that's something that is rare, but again, I've included both links to this book as well as his more kind of popular book that might be more consumable to you if you find this interesting. So of course you can check all those links in however you're consuming us. Below are pretty pictures that I keep making for you. So all right, so we're in chapter 5 of Are Miracles Possible? Hume and the Philosophical Questions, and this is kind of the part 2 version of it. And again, we're kind of taking it slow through here. We're kind of only covering these sections. So if you're going back through our catalog and going, wait, we're on chapter 4 here, but now 5, where's the other ones? We skipped over all that to make sure that we torpedoed Hume. So that's where we're at here. All right, so Keener is going to start here with Hume's epistemology regarding miracles. How do we know what we know about miracles? That's the epistemology, of course. Well, despite claims to argue inductively, Hume's arguments against miracles is deductive, which is always nice, because if you can show the unsoundness of the premises leading to the conclusion, or you can attack the conclusions there, it makes it way easier to kind of argue against. But Hume argues...
Yeah, and Keener is going to make this point over and over again.
Right.
Hume has not given us an inductive argument. He's given us a deductive argument. And that's part of the problem he's going to point out here, because he's going to suggest that since it's a deductive argument, it's circular, quite frankly. So this is, the spoiler alert here. Not an inductive argument, it's a deductive argument, and that's going to be part of the problems that he's going to point out here.
Right. And again, let's start off also saying that we can't cover everything in here. There was a lot of highlighting that I did that could lead to more. And so, of course, being a 2-volume set, we're skipping some portions to kind of bring you kind of the highlights here. So again, check out the book for more. Well, Hume argues from nature's uniformity against miracles, which is the point in question, right? That's the weird things that don't tend to happen. And so, if you have something so weird that it falls outside this, then you can reject it. But that's the whole thing that we're doing.
The question is, weird things happen, right? And just by saying weird things don't happen, well, wait a minute, right? You kind of, what's going on there?
Right. We're having 2 different conversations here, it seems. So you agreed to this when you stepped up. Well, Hume generalizes from the alleged lack of good testimony for miracles to exclude what may in fact be good testimony for miracles. If Hume intends such arguments to make miracles impossible, well, then his case is circular. And of course, that's the place where we can't go out of anything. That's what we're arguing about. We're trying to have a conversation here, and if you won't allow us to have it, then can't have a conversation.
Right, exactly. And so he says that if Hume argues that no evidence in principle can be sufficient to compel belief in miracles, then he tells us that his claim might succeed to the extent that the evaluator of the evidence held tenaciously to anti-miraculous presupposition, but it's not logically necessary if the evaluator is genuinely open-minded on the question. Right. And so he says none of the various interpretations of Hume offer, he believes, a successful argument against the possibility of miracles, or even of finding his argument more persuasive than not. Right. So, and again, he's going to say this over and over again. This is kind of a circular issue here that Hume is he's assuming what he's arguing.
Right. So, philosophers like scientists are wanting to kind of take their conclusions and give them to other people and say, here, hold these. Do you also get this? And it doesn't seem to be the case that no matter who you give the conclusions to Hume's arguments here, will hold it, will come to the same conclusion just based on kind of who they are and what you allow in, which tends to hurt the argument right from the get-go there. Well, Hume is going to talk about testimony, and his take on testimony might be, I hate to use the word problematic again, but it would tend to hurt the term testimony in pretty much all cases. Well, Hume's intellectual context forced him to challenge the reliability of testimony because it was the primary basis on which the early empiricists argued for miracles. He followed here one line of argument against New Testament miracles, emphasized by deists. And again, it's a weird rope to hitch your wagon to, but he kind of does it again and again. And again, deists are going to be people that say, well, yes, God exists, but he doesn't actively engage in entering into creation anymore. He kind of rested on the seventh day and continues to be asleep until he wakes up and the end comes. And then I guess things happen from there, or, the heat death of the universe will commence, and then God will come back and either wind it back up or erase it and do what he will after all that. Thus, Hume, seeking to make his case, quickly denies the sufficient credible witness exists to substantiate miracles. So he just erases them all from the argumentation in place. And so where might that leave us is the question. So right. Keener says, let us consider his argument in more detail. Are the witnesses and their miraculous interpretations potentially reliable? So again, We're talking about two different things. We're talking about both witnesses and interpretations, because you can have something like, I was just outside the other day for this taping, and we saw the lunar eclipse. We were thinking about how neat it looks, but we're also of the knowledge of what is happening. So what would the lunar eclipse look like to someone before the ideas of understanding that the Earth is casting the shadow on the moon and causing this type of eclipse? Is this a miraculous sign to those people? And so it's not just so much the witnesses themselves, but also their interpretations of the event.
Yeah, good. And so he says, according to a common reading of Hume rejects in practice the possibility of any witnesses reliable enough to challenge the likelihood of miracles. But he circularly bases this denial on the assumed uniformity of human experience, right, against miracles. And so a uniformity that would deconstruct if there were any adequately clear instances of such miracles. And so claiming uniform experience against miracles, Keener tells us, is not really an argument, right? Scholars often note because, it kind of begs the question at issue, which is the question is whether anyone has experienced a miracle. That's the question we're asking. And he says, well, there's uniform experience against miracles. Okay, but that is the question. Is there uniform experience against miracles? Has anyone ever experienced a miracle? That's kind of the question. And so you can see there the kind of circularity that he's trying to get at here with regard to Hume's position and argument.
Right. Right. Has anyone ever experienced a miracle? Absolutely not, because the experience of humanity is not to experience miracles. But I've had an experience of miracles. Well, that's not possible because we know that it's not possible to have an experience with miracles.
Because uniform experience has seen that there is no one has experienced a miracle. So,
right.
We have to dismiss any experience of miracles because uniform experience says there is no experience of miracles.
Right.
Come on, really?
Yeah. Right, exactly. Well, one critic put it like this. Hume used the unproved conclusion that miracles are not possible and made it a datum of his argument that miracles do not happen. So are miracles possible? Well, let me check. Miracles don't happen. Did a miracle happen? No. Well, that was easy. Right. Some supporters of miracles articulate this logical problem even more bluntly. It amounts to saying miracles violate the principle that miracles never happen. Yes, which maybe is miraculous in and of itself there. Claims about nature and miracles both rest on experience. So claimed experience of the former cannot cancel out claimed experience of the latter. And this is, problem of induction, right here again. How do you know what it will be in the future? Well, we know that I've never had an experience like this in the past. I've never been to the dentist before, therefore dentists don't exist. I'm at the dentist. Well, that's not possible because I've never had an experience before with a dentist. Well, okay, then what are we doing here? I'm in a chair, leaning back. Well, I can't rely on the experience because I've never had it before. If experience is reliable in knowing that water is normally not turned to wine, why would it be not reliable in recognizing when water is turned into wine?
Yeah. So experience against experience,
right,
is the problem here. He tells us that Hume grants in principle that one might accept witnesses who were unquestionably reliable, claiming, public events, and would have much to lose by lying. Yet scholars note that in practice, he rejects individual testimonies that, so far as anyone can discern by normal means of inquiry, would meet this very criteria, right? So, he has this high standard with regard to the reliability of the witnesses, but then when we meet that standard, he rejects it, is what Keener is suggesting here. He says Hume's denial of any historical eyewitnesses qualified to testify about miracles is no more than a bare assertion offered on his own authority. Right. By contrast, one of his early detractors offered more than 100 pages of arguments in response to such claims, which one might hope, Keener tells us, could count for more than bare assertion.
Right. When given more than bare assertion, then as long as you're Hume, you can dismiss it with bare assertion. All right, well, further, some of Hume's criteria for witnesses' acceptability are too vague to quantifiably support his case. Hume requires witnesses to be of unquestioned good sense, but the standard proves impossible to meet, since Hume appears to question the good sense of anyone who claims to have witnessed miracles. Again, you put these up and you just shift over everyone who claims to have unquestionable good sense. Well, if you experience a miracle,
right. So the person have unquestioned good sense,
right,
in order to make the claim reliable. But of course, anybody that makes the claim doesn't have good sense.
Right.
So you can,
Yeah, and this was the critique that we talked about in Chapter 4 of modern day historians, saying, well, if someone in history is claiming to have an account where a miracle occurs, we can just dismiss them because they're not a good witness. Right. Well, except they might be the only witness to the thing, is Caesar crossing the Rubicon, or the final battles of Alexander the Great. Well, this person claimed to also have seen a sign or experienced a miracle, and so we have to wipe that away. And now we just can't rely on anything that happened between Caesar of the two-party system in Rome, and then all of a sudden Caesar is now a Roman dictator, and we definitely don't know what happened in between there because we don't have enough good witness to testify to this.
Witnesses that have unquestioned good sense.
Unquestioned good sense, yes. So by contrast, if we employ such criteria in the ordinary sense of their everyday usage, we end up with plenty of witnesses that we might consider reputable and sensible, but whom Hume dismisses as unsatisfactory. If he simply will not deem anyone's testimony satisfactory, it seems somewhat disingenuous to expect his critics to go to the trouble of evaluating witnesses before he informs them of this caveat. Again, if you want witnesses, bring me the head of the person who claims that there's a miracle, and I will hear him out. Well, this man claims to be a miracle. Well, I can't hear him out because he's this, he doesn't have good sense because he believes in miracles. Now bring me somebody. Well, it doesn't seem like you ever want me to bring you something if you're just going to dismiss him right offhand with the claim of the thing that is in question. Again, the circularity thing haunts Hume's type of deductive logic here.
Yeah. And so Keener tells us again, he seems to employ an a priori definition to exclude the need for examination, defining a miracle as a sort of event that has never been observed. Hume simply dismisses or ignores the perspective of all those who claim to have seen or believe the claims of others to have seen such events, right? So it's never been observed. So obviously you have to dismiss anybody that says that they have observed them if it's never been observed, right? I mean, okay. So, what he's telling us here is that Hume must assume the error or lack of integrity of many eyewitnesses to maintain his theory. Yet he lacks grounds independent of his theory to accuse eyewitnesses of deception. So what would happen if we were to apply Hume's logic consistently to other areas of inquiry, right? And so that's what he wants to pursue next.
Right, exactly. So here is the consequences of such epistemic demands for other disciplines. So this was the, okay, let's kind of grant Hume this type of skepticism. What will that look like in other areas here? Well, for this a sort of case of eyewitnesses' testimony for miracle claims, Hume thinks it's unreasonable for people to defend on testimonial evidence, requiring instead direct experience. While in Hume's epistemology, uniform experience involved passive recollections of a sequence of events known to oneself and possibly one's colleagues, and no more. But such a generalization rests on too small a sample size to be legitimate. Why is that only the case? Further, one critic rightly objects, if Hume's criteria for accepting testimony as true were employed outside of miracle claims, we would probably have to dismiss the vast majority of what we believe we presently know about the past, since much of it depends on a single untested source.
There you go. And so as a much more general methodological consideration, he tells us Hume's unduly strict form of empiricism values experience over testimony, yet the vast majority of our general knowledge depends on testimony, right? The report of others' experiences, rather than our own more limited personal experience. And so granted that all eyewitness testimony is conditioned by observers' interpretations, jurors, for instance, let's say in a court situation, are expected to be able to infer significant aspects of events behind such testimonies. Without this assumption, the modern court system would collapse.
Right. And there are jury instructions. There are the ideas that both prosecution and defense brings up to jurors to help to evaluate. If a person is lying, if they're trustworthy. In 12 Angry Men, one of the main witnesses to the alleged murder, was asked to take off her glasses, and if she could see without them, you have people that whether or not a person has been convicted of a crime is sometimes argued for or thrown out against, depending on if it's germane to the situation. So trying to having this level playing field of what makes a witness credible is something that has been built into at least the Western court system since the time of probably the miracles themselves of the New Testament. So this is something that's not unheard of, and to completely kind of cut the legs off of even this. Well, then, unless if you are waiting for the modern advancement of perfect technology and hopefully that murder happens right in front of a camera lens, you're not going to be able to convict anybody of anything if you take kind of Hume's aspect here. All right, well, concluding this section, Keener says the evidence of the testimony must be given way to surmount prior improbabilities. Otherwise, there is no way to underwrite the sorts of inferences made in everyday life and science, such as newspaper report of a winning lottery ticket. And we'll get to that next time as well. But, one of the things that I've brought up in classes before is to talk about the structure of a DNA. What does a DNA look like? Oh, it's a double helix. It's got the bonds in the middle. We can all draw it because we saw Jurassic Park with the Dino DNA guy. But then you ask the class how many people have actually seen DNA, and no one, or almost no one, raises their hand. And you go, well, how do you know DNA looks like that? Well, based on testimony. Well, Whose testimony do you have to rely on to do that? Well, I could be shown it, but okay, well, let's say that you're only existing based on the knowledge of testimony. You have to throw out a lot of things within your daily life. I think we've talked about on the show before, your own name. How do you know your own name? Well, you can be shown court documents, but those things can be faked. It's the testimony of your parents. Well, how many do you need? Well, there's two, but anyone who's, they're too biased, right? Of course they know you. They're going to lie to you about your own name. So you have to find independent eyewitnesses who were there at your birth to your name that gave you your name. Well, my parents are the only ones there. Well, they're too biased, and so we have to throw them out. So, again, Hume's desire to want eyewitness testimony is upended by his own epistemology, and his undercutting of what constitutes a good witness is also suspect here in his cause for he's really trying to find a miracle, and no matter how many rocks he overturns, he can't seem to find it for some odd reason. All right, so that'll be the end of this episode. We'll continue on talking about Hume and his issues with witnesses next time, and of course you can always check out the short clips on YouTube, and also go to caveofthecross.com for all the other books that we've done in the past, including this one. And so hopefully this has been interesting and a good critique of what we tend to experience these days with I think we're less likely to bring up the idea of miracles in specifics and more of logical arguments for the existence of God. And so hopefully this has been a key to maybe challenging those ideas a little bit, because
and the key takeaway, at least from this small section, is really the idea of the circular argument that he's suggesting Hume makes with regard to miracles.
Exactly.
And of course, he's going to continue to talk about that throughout the rest of this chapter.
Right. And so we'll either do one or two more episodes next time. And so finish up the chapter and you'll be slightly ahead of us, but also we'll be slightly ahead of you because of how time works on the internet. So we just say thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next time.
See you next time.